everyone, I'm so excited to be bringing out this video today. I'm going to be talking about resin. So as you can see, I've got some drawers missing and I've got out all of my UV resin drawer here. So if you are a beginner and you're thinking about resin, whether it's epoxy resin or UV resin, this video is going to be useful for you. And I promise you, it really isn't as hard as it looks. So if you're feeling a bit intimidated by it all, I really hope that this video will be useful for you. And if you do find this video useful, please do give it a thumbs up and make sure you comment below if you have any tips. Share it with me, share it with everybody who's going to be coming onto this video. I'm not claiming that I'm a professional, but I have been using resin for some time now, and I'm so passionate about it, and I just want to share that with you all. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is that there are different resins. You have the epoxy resin, and these here are the epoxy resins that I have. So you have to mix them up, you've got to weigh them, and then you have to mix them up. So you have an A and a B, and you've got to do it via the ratio. So usually you have instructions, and this is a paper that I've got. So it tells you like the two parts and how much you've got to weigh and put them together, how much you have to mix it for. So this is a scale that I use. It's a small scale, and then I generally take disposable cups. So you've got like these small shot cups, or you can get bigger ones, bigger disposables. So with epoxy resin, you have an A bottle and a B bottle, and according to what product you use, some of them go via weight and some of them go via volume. And this one here says it's by weight. So you pour in A and B and then you mix them together in a cup. And as I said, it does depend on the product that you have, but you're going to find all the instructions there with how much to mix in each one. And to get epoxy resin right, you really have to stick to the instructions. However long it tells you to stir is how long you have to stir, and whatever it tells you to go by the weight or the volume, make sure that you just measure everything accordingly. So now we're moving on to the second type of resin, and this is a UV resin. UV resin is quite different to the epoxy resin in that you don't need to mix it. It doesn't have an A and B part. It's all mixed, it's already in one bottle. But in how they work, in the consistency, it's exactly the same as epoxy. So it's clear, you can do the same things with it. So I'm just going to highlight the actual differences between epoxy resin and UV resin. So if you don't have a lot of money, or you don't want to spend a large amount at once up front, then I would probably suggest to go with UV resin. These are cheaper, but in comparison, you get your money's worth from epoxy resin. It's just that epoxy resin will generally cost you about £20 plus, whereas you can find UV resin bottles starting from £2. But of course the bottles are small, so in comparison you do get your money's worth more with epoxy resin. For me personally, I did start with UV resin. I just wanted to spend a small amount up front just to see if I like it, how I get on with it, and I just wanted to experiment with all of the things that I could do. So you can have a go with this, and then once you get comfortable, you can move on to spending more money on epoxy resin. The other thing I wanted to say is that with UV resin, it's really good if you're trying to do small projects. So if you're looking to make jewelry and you're not looking to make a lot of pieces at once, then UV resin is better for you. But if you want to create a bulk amount of jewelry, then I would suggest going for epoxy resin. The main difference with epoxy resin and UV resin is that UV resin cures really quick using UV light. This is another advantage that I found with UV resin, because I don't have patience. So if you're limited for time and you want to make things really quick, then definitely stick with UV resin. Whereas epoxy resin takes quite a long time to cure. Depending on the product that you have, it can take a few hours, up to 24 hours or even 48 hours. And as you can imagine, working with epoxy resin can sometimes be a bit of a pain, especially if you are trying to collate layers. Then you've got to wait for 24 hours or a few hours just to create a single small layer before building the second layer. UV resin, however, cures in 5 to 7 minutes. So you can just go ahead and move on to your second layer or finish producing something in a matter of minutes. And this here is the UV light that you use when using UV resin. So this is a torch. You can see the blue light there. Mine's a bit dirty because it's actually touched some UV resin, but this is what I started out with. And you find these really cheap. I bought this for £2 something, so it will be around $2 to $3. So again, if you're just starting out, this is probably something that you want to go for. Now let me introduce this machine to you. This is usually used for nails, and you have two settings. So, well, on this machine, I've got one setting here, and then I have another setting here. And you have to put a timer on for that. And as you can see, it's blue light. So this here cost me £12. It isn't much at all, and you can get some for £10. The reason that I bought this is because it cures UV resin, just as the torch does, because it's blue light. And the reason why I just decided to stop using the torch is that with the torch you've got to sit there holding it, and that can be a bit of a pain, to be honest. You can't just get on with other things, and it's a bit fiddly in my opinion. And I thought, well, this doesn't actually cost much more either. So I went and purchased this. With this machine, you can just pop it inside and go ahead your business. And then once you come back, you just slide it out and it's all cured. Some of you were asking me, does it matter the power of the machine or the watts? It doesn't matter at all. It's still going to cure your resin. If you slide it out and realize that your piece is still tacky and it's not cured, then just pop it back in and give it a few more minutes. I get my UV resin from China, but sometimes you can come across some really crappy quality UV resin. So this one here, no matter how long I cured it, it had a really strong smell. It was just tacky, it just wasn't curing right. So I tried another brand, this one here, and it's still from China, but it's just amazing. No complaints whatsoever. And with epoxy resin you can get different types. So some of them are pour resins, and these kind of ones you see being poured on tabletops, on floors you can also do. There's a lot that you can do with epoxy resin. And depending on the product that you have, some of them you can pour on one layer, some of them are really thick, some of them you have to build up the layers, so you've got to pour a thin layer first, wait for it to cure, then pour another layer, wait for that to cure, and so on. So to summarize the difference between epoxy resin and UV resin, if you're looking for small projects like jewelry making, and you also want something quick, you want to cure something really fast, you don't have much time, or you're a bit impatient, or you don't want to spend too much upfront, then UV resin is what you should go for. And with epoxy resin, if you want your money's worth and you have enough money to spend up front, then you can go for that. And if you have bigger projects like you're pouring onto tabletops or any kind of surfaces and you need more in a bottle, then you should definitely go for epoxy resin. And with epoxy resin you're going to have different cure times, you're going to have different ways of measuring, so some will go via volume, some will go via weight, and some cures in one layer and some you have to build up in thin layers over time. Okay, so the only problem you're going to kind of have when you're using resin is bubbles. And the way to pop those really annoying bubbles is using some fire. So you can use one of these and just run over them really quickly, just like that. And if you feel a little intimidated by using fire, you can use some cocktail sticks. So all you do is poke at it really and just burst the bubbles. Or you can even use a straw to blow at the bubbles. And sometimes, no matter what you do, you won't be able to help some of the bubbles that come up. Look at this piece here, this was a complete fail, and as you can see inside there's really tiny bubbles, and I probably wouldn't have been able to get rid of those. But when you're working with a piece like this and it's a water feature, it doesn't matter so much. But where the problem is here, all of these big bubbles, and these marks. And the way that this happened was that it actually fell as it was curing. So air got in and all of these big pesky bubbles showed up. So you can see that this piece here is pretty big, but despite that I used UV resin for this. I just built it up in layers. So I poured this much and gave that 10 minutes to cure, and then I poured another, gave that 10 minutes to cure, and then I poured another. So this would have been the same process with epoxy resin other than the cure time. So I would have poured a layer, had to wait 24 hours or 48 hours depending on the product, and then once that's cured I would have had to pour another epoxy layer, wait for that to cure for however many hours, and then the final layer. So you could see UV resin works much faster than epoxy. I know so far it seems like there's quite a lot to take in, but honestly it's really easy. And once you get the hang of resin, you're going to want to resin everything and shove everything into resin. Honestly, it's a really magical medium to work with. Stay safe, use your gloves, and make sure that you have some windows open whenever you're working with resin and that you've got your mask on. The good thing about the resins that you can find nowadays is that it's generally non-toxic. Like this one here is non-toxic, and you can get some that have low fumes. So all of the resin that I work with is low fumes. Now we're going to get into the really fun part, and I'm going to show you all the possibilities that you have when you're using resin.